Captain Jake Morrison looked out at the huge space station floating in front of them. It was bigger than any city on Earth and made their ship look like a tiny toy. The station belonged to the Galactic Union, and today was the day humans would officially join this group of alien species. Jake felt nervous, but tried not to show it to his crew. Lisa Brooks stood next to him, holding a tablet full of information about the other species they would meet. She was Earth's best diplomat, and even she looked worried. The files say there are over 200 different species in the Union, she said quietly. Some of them have been traveling between stars for thousands of years. And how long have we been doing it? Asked Ben Carter from his seat at the navigation controls. About 15 years if you count our first successful jump to Alpha Centauri. Jake replied, We're definitely the new kids here. The truth was that humans had only been discovered by the Galactic Union 5 years ago. A Union scout ship had detected Earth's radio signals and came to investigate. What they found was a young species that had just figured out how to travel faster than light. According to Union law, every species that could travel between stars had the right to join. It did not matter how primitive they were. Most species took hundreds or even thousands of years to develop this technology. Humans had gone from flying in basic airplanes to jumping between star systems in less than 200 years. This made them interesting to some aliens and suspicious to others. Their ship, the U.S. Horizon, docked with the station with a soft bump. Through the windows, Jake could see other alien ships that looked nothing like human designs. Some were long and thin like needles. Others were round like bubbles. A few looked like they were made of living crystal that sparkled in the station's lights. Remember the briefing, Lisa said to the small group of humans who would be representing Earth. Be polite, but don't act weak. Show respect, but don't bow to anyone. We may be new, but we earned our place here. The airlock opened, and they walked into the station. The first thing Jake noticed was how different everything looked. The halls were much taller than needed for humans, because some species were very large. The air smelled strange and felt thick. Lights came in colors he had never seen before. They were met by a tall, thin alien with blue skin and 4 arms. It spoke through a translation device that made its words sound flat and emotionless. Welcome, representatives of humanity. I am Guide Veltar of the Meridian Consortium. I will show you to the newcomer orientation area. As they walked through the station, Jake saw dozens of different aliens going about their business. Some walked on 2 legs like humans, but others crawled or floated or moved in ways that hurt his brain to watch. Most of them looked at the human group with curious eyes. A few seemed to be laughing, though Jake could not hear any sound. The orientation area was a large room with seats designed for many different body types. About 30 other aliens were there, and Jake realized these must be representatives from other new species. They all looked just as nervous as he felt. Guide Veltar began explaining how the Union worked. It was complicated with many different councils and committees and voting procedures. The most important decisions were made by something called the High Council, which was controlled by the oldest and most powerful species. Newer species like humans would start on smaller committees and work their way up over time. How much time? Asked Lisa. The Corvin hegemony joined 800 years ago, and they are still considered a junior member, Veltar replied. Patience is very important in galactic politics. Jake felt his heart sink. 800 years. That was longer than most human civilizations had even existed. How could they possibly wait that long to have any real influence? After the orientation, they were shown to their assigned quarters. The rooms were basic, but clean with furniture that could be adjusted for different body types. Jake sat on his bed and looked out the small window at the endless stars outside. So what do you think? Lisa asked as she entered his room. I think we're in way over our heads, Jake said honestly. These aliens have been doing this for thousands of years. They have technology we can barely understand. What could we possibly offer them? Lisa was quiet for a moment, then smiled. Maybe that's exactly what they need. Someone who thinks differently. Someone who hasn't spent thousands of years doing things the same old way. Jake hoped she was right, because right now being the newest member of the Galactic Union felt more like a burden than an honor. But they were here now, and there was no going back. Earth was counting on them to make this work somehow. 6 months had passed since humans joined the Galactic Union, and Amy Rodriguez was starting to understand how things really worked. She sat in another boring meeting of the Cultural Exchange Committee, listening to aliens argue a proper greeting. Rituals between species. This was the kind of work they gave to new members, while the important decisions happened somewhere else. Amy was Earth's top expert on alien biology and behavior, but here she felt like a student being kept busy with homework, while the adults handled real business. The Cultural Exchange Committee was supposed to help different species understand each other better. In reality, it spent most of its time making reports that nobody read. The proper tail position for greeting a hexapod delegate requires a minimum angle of 45 degrees, explained Committee Chair Zenthok through his translator. This has been established protocol for 300 years. Amy wanted to scream. While they debated tail angles, the real power in the Union was controlled by a small group of elder species. The Zephyrian Republic had the fastest ships and controlled most trade routes. The Crystalline Collective could manipulate matter at the atomic level and dominated manufacturing. The Vorthan Empire ruled 47 star systems through military might. These 3 species plus a few others made all the important decisions in the High Council. Everyone else, including humans, just had to accept whatever they decided. It was not exactly the democracy that Earth's leaders had hoped for. But Amy was a scientist, and scientists observed carefully. During her months on the station, she had noticed things that the elder species seemed to miss. The newer species were forming their own informal groups. They met in small cafeterias and recreation areas to complain about their treatment. More importantly, they were starting to work together on minor projects. The Corvan hegemony had excellent defensive technology but needed better sensors. The Binari Republic had great sensors but weak defenses. When Amy suggested they might help each other, both species seemed surprised that a human had noticed the connection. Within a week, they had started sharing information. "You have an interesting way of seeing patterns," said Delegate Prime Cathvon of the Corvan hegemony after their first successful collaboration. "Most species focus only on their own needs." Amy smiled. Humans learned early that cooperation makes everyone stronger. We had to learn that, or we would have destroyed ourselves. This was true. Human history was full of wars and conflicts, but they had also learned to work together when facing common problems. Now Amy wondered if the same approach might work in galactic politics. She started keeping careful notes about which species were frustrated with Union leadership. The list was longer than she expected. 47 species, including humans, were considered junior members with limited voting rights. Many had been waiting decades or even centuries for advancement that never came. The elder species were not evil or cruel. They were just set in their ways. They had been running the Union for so long that they could not imagine doing things differently. Change happened slowly in their culture, and they saw patience as a virtue. But patience was hard when your people needed help now. Amy began reaching out to other junior species representatives during her free time. She was careful to keep these conversations informal and friendly. Nobody wanted to be accused of plotting against Union leadership. But she learned a lot about the problems facing newer members. The Meridian Consortium controlled important shipping routes, but charged high fees that hurt smaller species. The Ethon Republic had advanced medical technology, but only shared it with their closest allies. The elder species talked about unity and cooperation, but mostly helped each other. The system works fine if you are already powerful, explained Dr. Nex High of the Talarian Assembly during one of their private conversations. For the rest of us, it feels like being permanent children. Amy reported her observations to President Carol Phillips back on Earth through encrypted communications. Earth's government was very interested in her findings. They had hoped joining the Union would give humanity access to advanced technology and new opportunities. Instead, they were learning that real power was reserved for species that had earned it through centuries of service. Keep building relationships, President Phillips told her during their weekly call, and keep learning how this system really works. Knowledge is power, and right now we need all the power we can get. Amy agreed, but she was starting to think that knowledge alone might not be enough. The junior species needed something that would force the elder species to take them seriously. They needed to prove they could contribute something valuable that the established powers could not ignore. The opportunity would come sooner than anyone expected. Strange reports were starting to reach the Union about attacks on shipping convoys. Near the Galactic Rim, pirates were not unusual, but these attacks were different. The attackers used technology that nobody recognized, and they disappeared without taking any cargo. The elder species were calling for committees to study the problem. They wanted environmental assessments and impact reports and detailed analyses of every possible response. Meanwhile, ships kept disappearing and colonies near the rim were starting to panic. Amy watched the slow response with growing frustration. This was exactly the kind of problem that showed why the Union needed fresh thinking. The elder species were so focused on following proper procedures that they forgot people were dying while they debated. She began reaching out to her contacts among the junior species. If the elder species would not act quickly, then maybe it was time for someone else to take the lead. It was a dangerous idea that could get her in serious trouble. But Amy was beginning to think that sometimes you had to take risks to do what was right. The attack on New Montana changed everything. Pete Jackson had been commanding Earth's small defense fleet when the distress call came through. The human colony was under attack by unknown ships using weapons that cut through their shields like paper. Without waiting for permission from Union Command, Pete ordered his squadron to jump immediately. What they found was chaos. The attackers called themselves Void Wraiths, and their ships moved like nothing Pete had ever seen. They appeared from nowhere, struck fast, and vanished before anyone could respond effectively. Their technology was clearly far beyond anything the Union possessed. Pete's ships were outnumbered and outgunned, but he had one advantage the Wraiths did not expect. Human military doctrine was based on fighting other humans who were equally unpredictable and ruthless. While other species followed established battle formations, humans had learned to improvise and adapt. All ships break formation and engage. Independently, Pete ordered over the cone. Use the asteroid field for cover and hit them from unexpected angles. His pilots followed orders, even though it went against everything they had been taught about proper fleet tactics. Instead of maintaining neat lines, they scattered like a swarm of angry insects. They used debris fields and radiation clouds to mask their approach. Most importantly, they were willing to take risks that other species would consider reckless. The strategy worked. The Void Wraiths had superior individual ships, but they were not prepared for opponents who fought dirty. Pete's squadron managed to damage several enemy vessels and force them to retreat. It was the first time anyone had successfully engaged the Wraiths and lived to tell about it. News of the victory spread quickly through Union space. The elder species were shocked that humans had managed what their own fleets could not. More importantly, humanity had acted without waiting for official authorization. They had broken protocol but saved lives. Back on the Union station, Amy Rodriguez saw her chance. She called an emergency meeting of junior species representatives, using her authority as a cultural exchange committee member. The meeting room was packed with delegates who had been waiting months for someone to take action. While the High Council debates proper procedures, our colonies are being destroyed, Amy said to the gathered aliens. The humans proved that these wraiths can be fought, but we need to work together if we want to stop them. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species after species volunteered ships and resources for a joint defense force. The Corvin hegemony offered their excellent shields. The Binary Republic provided advanced sensors. The Meridian Consortium pledged their fastest courier ships for communications. Within hours, Amy had organized something that had never existed before, a united military force composed entirely of junior species. They called it the Junior Species. Coalition and elected Pete Jackson as their military commander. It was a bold move that could get them all expelled from the Union. The elder species reacted with outrage when they learned about the coalition. Ambassador Zenthalk of the Crystalline Collective filed formal complaints about unauthorized military action. The Vorthan Empire demanded that all coalition ships be placed under their command immediately. This is completely improper, declared High Counselor Veltar during an emergency session. Military operations must be coordinated through established channels with proper oversight and environmental assessments. Amy stood before the High Council for the first time in her life. The chamber was enormous, with seats for over 200 species, arranged in tiers that emphasized the hierarchy of power. The elder species sat in the front rows, while newer members were relegated to the back. With respect, honored counselors, our environmental assessment is simple, Amy said, trying to keep her voice steady. If we do not stop the void wraiths, there will be no environment left to assess. The argument that followed lasted for hours. The elder species insisted that proper procedures must be followed even in crisis situations. The junior species pointed out that following procedures had gotten them nowhere while people died. It was a fundamental disagreement about how the Union should operate. In the end, the crisis made the decision for them. While the council debated, the void wraiths attacked 3 more systems simultaneously. The coalition fleet responded immediately, while Union forces were still getting authorization to deploy. Pete Jackson's mixed squadron of alien ships fought desperate battles across multiple star systems. The humans found themselves in the strange position of commanding alien crews who had never worked together before. Each species had different strengths and weaknesses. The trick was learning how to combine their abilities into something greater than the sum of its parts. The Corvin shields can absorb massive damage, but their weapons are weak, Pete explained to his new alien commanders. The Binari have incredible sensors, but their hulls are fragile. The Meridians are fast, but carry limited ammunition. He developed new tactics that played to each species' strengths while covering their weaknesses. Corvin ships became mobile, shields protecting more vulnerable allies. Binari vessels stayed back and provided targeting data for long-range strikes. Meridian fighters used hit-and-run attacks to keep enemies off balance. The Void Wraiths were forced to adapt to opponents who did not fight by galactic convention. They had expected the Union to respond with overwhelming force and defensive formations. Instead, they faced smaller, more flexible forces that struck without warning and vanished before retaliation was possible. The first major coalition victory came at the Battle of Kepler Station. Pete's combined fleet managed to destroy 2 Wraith heavy cruisers and capture valuable intelligence about their technology. The victory proved that the enemy could be defeated, but it came at a heavy cost in lives and ships. When news reached the Union station, the elder species were forced to admit that the junior species had achieved something they could not. The coalition had proven that cooperation and innovation could overcome technological disadvantage. More importantly, they had shown that waiting for permission was not always the right choice. Amy watched the High Council session, where they formally recognized the coalition as an official Union military force. It was a small victory, but an important one. For the first time, junior species had forced the elder species to change their position. The balance of power in the galaxy was starting to shift. The Battle of Titan's Gate would determine the future of the galaxy. Admiral Pete Jackson stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the tactical display that showed the largest Void Wraith fleet ever assembled. They were trying to capture the hyperspace junction that controlled access to the core systems. If they succeeded, the heart of Union space would be defenseless. The Coalition fleet that faced them was a strange sight. Ships from 47 different species floated in formation, each one designed according to completely different principles. Some were sleek and elegant, while others looked like flying rocks. A few seemed to be made of living crystal that pulsed with inner light. Pete had spent months learning how to command this diverse force. Each species brought their own strengths, but also their own limitations and cultural quirks. The Corvin crews were extremely disciplined, but slow to adapt when plans changed. The Binari were brilliant tacticians, but terrible at close combat. The Meridians were fearless fighters, but had trouble following complex orders. Enemy fleet is moving into attack formation, reported Commander Kate Wilson from the sensor station. She was one of the few humans in the mixed crew that operated the Coalition flagship. Estimated time to engagement is 30 minutes. The Void Wraiths had superior technology and twice as many ships. Their vessels could phase in and out of normal space, making them almost impossible to target effectively. Their weapons could punch through any known shield, and their speed was unmatched. By every logical measure, the Coalition should have no chance of victory. But Pete had learned something important during months of fighting. The Wraiths were used to enemies who followed predictable patterns. They expected fleets to advance in formation and fight according to established military doctrine. Human military thinking was different because humans had spent centuries fighting other humans who were just as smart and just as ruthless. All ships prepare for unconventional engagement, Pete announced over the fleet communications channel. Corvin heavy cruisers will advance directly at the enemy center. Binari sensor ships will stay back and provide targeting data. Meridian fighters will use the asteroid field for cover. The alien commanders acknowledged his orders, but Pete could sense their nervousness. What he was planning went against everything they had been taught about proper fleet tactics. Instead of keeping the fleet together, he was deliberately splitting it into smaller groups that could be defeated individually. The Void Wraith commander watching from his flagship was equally confused. "They are dividing their forces," he reported. To his tactical officer, "Are they trying to retreat?" "Unknown, sir. Their formation makes no strategic sense." The battle began when the Corvin heavy cruisers charged straight at the center of the Wraith formation. Their massive shields absorbed incredible punishment, while their crews held course with grim determination. The Wraiths concentrated there, fire on what appeared to be the main attack, believing they were facing a desperate frontal assault. But the Corvin advance was a deception. While the enemy focused on the obvious threat, Pete's real attack came from the asteroid field or Meridian. Fighters had been hiding among the rocks. They struck the Wraith flanks with precision strikes guided by Binari sensor data that could track enemies even when they phased out of normal space. The Wraiths found themselves caught between multiple threats coming from unexpected directions. Their superior technology meant nothing when they could not predict where the next attack would come from. Ships that tried to phase away from one threat materialized directly into the path of another. Human tactical doctrine is based on deception and misdirection, Pete explained to his diverse command staff as the battle raged around them. "We learned to fight enemies who were just as smart as we were, so we had to be unpredictable to survive." The Coalition forces pressed their advantage, using tactics that no galactic military would consider proper. Unmanned cargo ships were converted into guided missiles and rammed into enemy vessels. Fighter squadrons pretended to retreat, only to lead pursuers into carefully prepared ambushes. Most shocking of all, Pete ordered damaged coalition ships to self-destruct near enemy formations, causing maximum casualties. The elder species watching from Union Command were horrified by what they saw. "They are fighting like barbarians," declared Admiral Zenthok of the Crystalline Collective, sacrificing ships and crews with no regard for proper military protocol. But the tactics worked. The Void Wraith fleet found itself outmaneuvered by opponents who refused to fight according to established rules. Their technological advantages meant nothing when they could not predict what their enemies would do next. For the first time in the war, they were forced to retreat from a major engagement. The victory came at a terrible cost. Nearly half the coalition fleet was destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Thousands of brave aliens had died following human orders that seemed insane by galactic standards. But they had saved the core systems and proven that the Void Wraiths could be defeated. Pete stood among the wreckage of his command center as damage reports came in from across the fleet. The coalition had won, but barely. If the Wraiths regrouped and attacked again, the defenders might not be able to stop them. "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from Union Command," reported Lieutenant Ben Hayes from the communications station. "They want to speak with you immediately." Pete knew what was coming. The elder species would demand explanations for his unconventional tactics. They would file complaints about his reckless endangerment of Allied crews. Some would probably call for his removal from command. But as he prepared to face their criticism, Pete felt no regret. The coalition had saved billions of lives and opened the vital hyperspace lanes. Sometimes victory required doing things that others considered wrong. The galaxy was learning that human methods might be disturbing, but they were also effective. Real question now was whether the elder species would continue to criticize the coalition's success or finally admit that maybe there was something to learn from the newcomers, who had been willing to do whatever it took to win. 3 years had passed since the Battle of Titan's Gate, and the galaxy had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. Dr. Amy Rodriguez sat in her new office, overlooking the main assembly hall, where representatives from dozens of species were working together on legislation that would have been impossible under the old system. The Void Wraith War, as historians now called it, had lasted 3 brutal years. During that time, the Junior Species Coalition had evolved from a desperate alliance into the most effective military and political force the galaxy had ever seen. Under human leadership, they had won 17 major battles and successfully defended 42 star systems. More importantly, they had learned to work together in ways the elder species never had. The Corvan hegemony now shared their shield technology freely with former enemies. The Binari Republic accepted strategic orders from species they had barely heard of 5 years earlier. The coalition had become something greater than the sum of its parts. Amy reviewed the voting tallies on her desk with growing satisfaction. The numbers were simple but revolutionary. The Junior Species Coalition now represented 63% of Union membership. They had more votes than all the elder species combined. For the first time in galactic history, the newcomers had become the majority. "The motion of no confidence has passed," reported her assistant, Jake Morrison, who had become her chief political advisor after leaving military service. The vote was 412 in favor to 208 against. Amy nodded, but felt no joy in the victory. The elder species had fought the vote desperately, using every political trick they knew. They had called in old favors and made promises they could not keep. In the end, it had not been enough. The junior species had voted them out of power by an overwhelming margin. President Carol Phillips, back on Earth, had been following the developments with intense interest. During their weekly communication, she expressed both pride and concern about how quickly things were changing. The Zephyrian Republic is threatening to withdraw from the Union entirely, Carl reported from her office in Washington. The Vorthan Empire has cut off trade with coalition members. Some of our allies are getting nervous about how the elder species are reacting. Amy understood their concerns. The transition of power had not been smooth or peaceful. The elder species were not evil, but they had controlled galactic politics for so long that they could not imagine functioning any other way. Being voted out by species they considered children was both humiliating and terrifying, but the coalition had earned their authority through sacrifice and success. They had been willing to fight and die when the elder species preferred to debate and study. They had proven that cooperation and innovation could overcome technological disadvantage. Most importantly, they had shown results that benefited everyone. The new coalition council met for the first time in the same chamber where Amy had once stood as a nervous newcomer begging for attention. Now she was the elected secretary of interspecies relations, while Pete Jackson had become supreme military commander. President Carol Phillips served as the rotating chairwoman representing Earth's interests. The changes went far beyond simple politics. Under coalition leadership, trade had increased by 40% across all sectors. Piracy had been virtually eliminated through coordinated patrol efforts. The threat of external invasion had been neutralized by the most effective military force in galactic history. Perhaps most importantly, species that had never cooperated before were now working together on projects that benefited everyone. The Corvin defensive technology was being combined with binary sensors to create early warning systems. Meridian speed was being paired with human tactical doctrine to train the next generation of military officers. The transformation has been remarkable, observed Commander Lisa Brooks during a staff meeting. She had become Amy's deputy after her diplomatic career took off following first contact. 3 years ago, these species could barely agree on meeting schedules. Now they are sharing their most advanced technologies. But the success had come at a price. The elder species accused the coalition of aggressive cultural imperialism. They claimed that human methods were too violent and emotional for civilized galactic society. Some threatened to form their own separate alliance if the current trends continued. Amy knew these criticisms had some truth to them. Human leadership had changed the Union in fundamental ways. The slow, careful deliberation that had characterized galactic politics for millennia had been replaced by rapid decision-making and direct action. Not everyone was comfortable with the new pace of change. The real test came when the Crystalline Collective formally requested to join the coalition. As associate members, it was the first elder species to admit that the new system might be better than the old one. Their application included offers to share matter manipulation, technology in exchange for tactical training and political representation. If we accept them, other elder species will follow, Pete warned during the coalition leadership meeting. But we need to be careful not to let them take over from the inside what they could not control from the outside. Amy agreed with his caution, but also saw the opportunity. The coalition had proven that diversity was strength when properly managed. Adding elder species wisdom and experience to junior species innovation and energy could create something even more powerful. The decision was made to accept the Crystalline Collective application with conditions. They would be associate members with limited voting rights until they proved their commitment to coalition principles. It was the same treatment the elder species had given to newcomers for thousands of years. The irony was not lost on anyone. The species that had once demanded patience from others now had to demonstrate it themselves. The galaxy was learning that leadership was not about age or technology or tradition. It was about being willing to fight for something bigger than yourself. As Amy prepared for another day of coalition business, she reflected on how quickly everything had changed. Humanity had gone from unwanted newcomers to reluctant leaders in less than a decade. They had never sought power for its own sake, but had simply been willing to act when others would not. The greatest lesson was that their supposed flaws had become their greatest strengths. Human recklessness was actually courage. Their aggression was determination. Their emotionalism was compassion for those who could not defend themselves. The last species to join the Galactic Union had become the first that everyone else wanted to follow. Fleet Admiral Susan Clark stood on the observation deck of Union Central Station, watching ships from dozens of species move in perfect coordination around the massive structure. 5 years had passed since the Coalition took control of Galactic. Government and the transformation was complete. The same station where humans had once arrived as nervous newcomers was now the center of the most successful interspecies alliance in galactic history. "The morning briefing is ready, Admiral," reported Commander Kevin Nash as he approached with a data pad full of reports. He was part of the new generation of human officers who had grown up expecting to work alongside aliens as equals, rather. Then Superiors. Susan reviewed the daily summaries with satisfaction. The Void Wraiths had been pushed back beyond the galactic rim after Coalition forces developed new long-range sensor technology that could track their previously undetectable ships. Trade was flowing freely through hyperspace lanes that were safer than they had been in centuries. Most importantly, the member species were working together voluntarily rather than being forced into cooperation. "The Zephyrian Republic has formally applied for full Coalition membership," Kevin continued. "They are offering to share their faster-than-light drive technology in exchange for inclusion in the Defense Planning Committee." Susan nodded thoughtfully. The Zephyrians had been one of the most resistant elder species when the Coalition first took power. Their decision to join represented a fundamental shift in how they viewed galactic politics. They were finally admitting that the new system worked better than the old one. The transformation had not been easy or quick. Many elder species had initially refused to cooperate with what they saw as an illegitimate government led by primitive newcomers. Some had even threatened to form their own separate alliance. But economic and military realities eventually forced them to reconsider their positions. The Coalition controlled the most effective military force in the galaxy, and their economic policies had created unprecedented prosperity. Species that remained outside the system found themselves increasingly isolated and disadvantaged. One by one they began applying for membership, or at least associate status. "What about the Vorthan Empire?" Susan asked. The Vorthans had been the most stubborn holdouts, refusing all offers of cooperation and maintaining their own independent military forces. Still officially independent, but 3 of their client species have joined the Coalition, Kevin replied. Economic pressure is mounting, and their military is having trouble recruiting qualified officers, since most young Vorthans prefer Coalition training programs. Susan smiled at the irony. The Vorthan Empire had once been the most feared military power in the galaxy. Now their own people were choosing to serve under human-trained commanders because Coalition forces had better equipment, better training, and better opportunities for advancement. The success story was being repeated across the galaxy. The Coalition had not conquered or absorbed the elder species. Instead, they had created a system so attractive that others wanted to join voluntarily. It was a kind of soft power that humanity had learned from their own history of democracy, and free markets. Dr. Amy Rodriguez, now Director of Interspecies Relations, often reflected on how quickly everything had changed during their weekly planning meetings. She had been there from the beginning, when humans were dismissed as ignorant newcomers who needed to learn patience and proper procedures. "The cultural exchange programs are exceeding all expectations," Amy reported during the latest leadership conference. "We have over 10,000 young beings from different species studying together on Coalition worlds. They are learning each other's languages, technologies, and customs. This was perhaps the most important long-term change. The elder species had always maintained strict separation between their peoples, believing that cultural purity was essential for maintaining their distinct identities. The coalition encouraged mixing and sharing, creating a new generation that thought of themselves as galactic citizens rather than members of individual species. Carol Phillips, during her final term in office, had watched these developments with pride and some amazement. Earth had gone from an isolated backwater to the center of galactic civilization in less than 15 years. It was a transformation that would have seemed impossible when she first took office. The key was never seeking power for its own sake. Carl explained during a farewell address to the Coalition Council. We succeeded because we were willing to fight for principles bigger than ourselves. We proved that leadership is earned through service, not inherited through tradition. The elder species had finally begun to understand this lesson. The Crystalline Collective had become enthusiastic coalition supporters after seeing how their technology was being used to benefit everyone rather than just themselves. Even the proud Ethon Republic had admitted that human diplomatic methods were more effective than their traditional approaches. The military transformation was equally impressive. Coalition forces now included officers and crews from over 100 different species, all trained according to human tactical doctrine that emphasized flexibility, innovation, and cooperative problem-solving. The old rigid hierarchies based on species status had been replaced by merit-based advancement that rewarded competence and creativity. Admiral Pete Jackson had retired from active duty but remained as senior advisor for military affairs. His legacy was visible in every coalition fleet where former enemies worked together seamlessly under unified command structures. The tactics he had developed during the Void Wraith War were now taught at military academies throughout Union space. The greatest victory was not defeating the Wraiths, Pete often told new officer candidates. It was proving that different species could work together as equals when they shared common goals and mutual respect. As Susan prepared for another day of fleet operations, she thought about how far they had all come. The observation deck, where she stood, had once been used by elder species ambassadors to look down on newcomers with condescension. Now it served as a symbol of how high anyone could rise through dedication and service. The galaxy had learned that diversity was strength when properly channeled. Human recklessness had become courage. Their aggression had become determination. Their emotional nature had become compassion for those who needed protection. The species that had been last to join the Galactic Union had become the first that others wanted to follow. Looking out at the stars, Susan knew that this was just the beginning. The coalition had solved the immediate problems of war and political instability. Now they faced the greater challenge of building a truly united galactic civilization that could last for thousands of years. It would not be easy, but humanity had already proven that impossible things could become routine when people were willing to work together toward common goals.